Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Archive Dive. I'm Maria Lockwood, a reporter with the Superior Telegram. Each month, we dip into files on historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County with local historians. Today, we look back at a Superior wedding that transfixed the nation, the 1945 marriage of America's ace of aces, Major Richard Ira Bong, and his sweetheart, Marge Vattendahl. Our guide will be retired librarian and local historian, Teddie Meronek. Hi, Teddie.
Hi, Maria.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So you've been researching this wedding, and one of the things you found out was that there was a telegram scoop, correct?
There was a scoop by a telegram reporter named Sybil Weed. Well, she was Sybil Marshall at that time. Mm-hmm. And she was having her hair done at a local salon, which may have even been in the Telegram building. And while she was there, she found out the date that Richard Bong and Marge Vattendahl were getting married. And she went and ran to stop the presses at the Telegram, even though she had wet hair. She went and she stopped the presses and she scooped everyone in the nation about this huge event that people were waiting for and so excited about.
The big scoop she got was that the wedding date was going to be February 10th.
That's right.
Following long-distance telephone conversation with her fiancé in Washington, D.C., Miss Marjorie Ann Vattendahl Saturday announced that February 10th will be the date for her wedding to Major Richard I. Bong Poplar, #1 Army air ace who has destroyed 40 Japanese planes. Details of the wedding plans are announced on the Society page of the Evening Telegram. The wedding will take place at 8 p.m. Saturday, February 10th, at the Concordia Lutheran Church here with the Reverend Paul E. Bowe, pastor, officiating in the single ring ceremony. So, tell us a little bit about how big of an event this was in the nation.
Well, everyone sent reporters from magazines, nationwide magazines and newspapers. They also sent film crews that would film newsreels to be shown in the news in the movie theaters, because that was the way you got your TV news in those days,
right,
before television. And they were all here. And of course, the Telegram covered it, as did the Tribune, all local newspapers. It was a huge event. And I imagine it was just because it was a bright spot in a war that had gone on way too long. And everybody was looking forward to it. And I think that it must have been so exciting just to be in town and to know that Superior was the focus of the nation, because here was the ace of aces and his sweetheart getting married in February of 1945.
Right. And as I understand it, they wanted to get married earlier? They
did. Dick Bong had told Marge that he was not going to get married while he was flying. Mm-hmm. That was the one thing. He didn't think it was fair that if something happened and he had been married, if he had died while he was flying in the Pacific. In December of 1944, he had been awarded the Medal of Honor. And after that, he had shot down 40 planes by then. And after he got the Medal of Honor, they pulled him out of combat. So he was done at the end of December. And that when Marge found out, or when he told her that he was done, they decided that they were going to get married then in February. And they wanted to get married on February 3rd, but his mom and Marge's mom said, no, that's not enough time. So they postponed it until February 10th and gave moms an extra week.
Excellent. Now, as I understand it, they had more than one ceremony?
Yes, because Dick and Marge really wanted it to be their wedding, and they didn't want reporters or film crews filming it. So they allowed one photographer, a pool photographer, that would take pictures for all of the magazines, the national newspapers, and whatever. They let him come to the ceremony, and he was allowed to take 2 photos during the actual ceremony. After they got done with the first ceremony, they had to repeat it 3 times for the newsreel cameras. Oh. So they would have the news to show nationwide in the movie theaters. And that's what they did, But Marge and Dick really wanted it to be their wedding. They didn't want it to be everyone's wedding. It was just their wedding.
but they knew that they needed to share it with the
Right,
nation
right,
as well.
right.
So 4 times they went through.
4 times.
Excellent. And as I understand it, there was a pretty large wedding cake.
There was Robert Butler, who was president of Walter Butler Shipbuilders, which was the largest shipbuilders in the Twin Ports, decided that his gift to Marge and Dick would be a wedding cake. Dick had been to the shipyards a number of times when he had been home, when they had bond drives, when they were raising money to buy war bonds. And he had flown over the shipyard, and he had come to the shipyard many times. So I imagine this was Mr. Butler's way of repaying Dick for his time and his enthusiasm in the war bond drive. So it wasn't a typical wedding cake. No. Mr. Butler had decided that he was going to give them a 7-foot wedding cake. I think it was 7 feet by 3 feet. And on top of it was an exact replica of the ship that had been built by Walter Butler Shipbuilders and had been christened by Dick's mother, Dora Bong. And I think that was about 6 feet in itself, the ship that was on top of the cake. And the frosting on the top looked like waves. I think they were tinted blue. And on the boat were a little bride and groom, just to make it authentic. And I don't know, I can't remember exactly what was written on the cake. It was something like smooth sailing, Marge and Dick, or something like that. But it was huge. And they cut it with a sword when they cut out the first piece. Yeah, it weighed, I think I read that it weighed 700 pounds. And they had used 1,000 eggs to make it. It was a Lady Baltimore cake, and was it 75 pounds of flour to make it? So it was very impressive, I'm sure.
I'm sure. And you don't know if they saved any piece for
I don't know.
next year, huh?
But it looked like it took about 4 or 6 men to carry it into Concordia for the reception.
Excellent. So there was cake for all.
There was cake for all. And they had about 1,300 people at the actual wedding ceremony. Concordia is a big church. Mm-hmm. It was either 12 or 1,300, but only 150 people got invited to the reception.
Okay.
I'm sure it was just their family and friends.
Definitely. Mm. And the church, even at a 1,300 seating, they didn't have enough room for everyone. Right.
There were 500 people waiting outside. And it was about 15 degrees that day. So, and there had been people waiting outside all day.
Wow.
Pretty exciting.
Right. And like you said, news from all over,
everybody,
video.
The major news, newscasters, everybody was there. Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah. But you can understand in a way, because when I was looking through the newspapers about the wedding, mm-hmm. you can't help but notice that every day there would be on the front page that someone from Superior, Douglas County had been killed in action, and it was the last months of the war in Europe, but still it had gone on so long and the losses had been so great. It must have been nice to focus on something that was happy and beautiful. So
yes. Can you tell me a little bit about, let's go back to when Marge and Dick met?
Well, Dick had been gone for 2 years. He came home in November of 1943. First time he'd been home in about 2 years, and he came home for hunting season. I think he had a 60-day leave. And so everyone was so excited. I can't imagine how his parents felt. Their oldest child gone for 2 years and gone to war. So I imagine they were very excited about him coming home. And he was driving up from Milwaukee. And so everyone was at the house, his brothers and sisters and mom and dad, and his grandmother lived with him too. And then pretty soon, a whole bunch of other people turned up, including, I believe it was it a 39-piece band from the Army Air Corps? They were stationed, or they were training at the college in Superior. And so they drove out to Poplar with their instruments, to greet Dick. And then the Junior Chamber of Commerce was out there, and the American Legion, a couple professors from college who had been Dick's instructors, one of them who had been his flying instructor. They were out there, the entire Bong family. And so Dick came home about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I watched this video called The Boy from Poplar, and they interviewed his sisters, Jerry and Joyce. And even 50 years after that event, you could just see in their faces how excited they were and what a joyous memory it was, because they said everyone was singing. They were all around the piano, and they were just waiting for Dick to come home. So he made it home. The American Legion had made it their job to find new hunting boots for Dick and his dad, because they were almost impossible to find because of the rubber shortage. And they also supplied them with ammunition for deer hunting, because that was also in short supply. So Dick was all set. The next day, Marge and her sorority sisters drove out to the Bong home in Poplar, hoping to see Dick and ask him if he would come to the college and crown the king, the homecoming king. Marge was going to crown the homecoming queen because she had been queen the previous year. And they got out there, and Mrs. Bong invited them all in. There were about 4 or 5 sorority sisters with Marge, and they were so disappointed. She said, well, Dick just left. You probably passed him. He was on his way to Superior with his sister. So they wrote him a note, and Mrs. Bong said, well, she would try to encourage him to accept this offer. So the first time that Marge met Dick, she wrote it down in an interview she had given, that it was on, I think, November 30th at 10 o'clock p.m.
Okay.
Because he was there. He actually did show up to take part in the ceremony. And she said one of the most striking things about him was his blue eyes. Oh. And they went through Crown the King and Queen, and he stayed around for a while, and then he left. And Marge, I think their sorority was sort of in charge of the homecoming event that year, and they finally cleaned up afterwards and left, and they went down to Chef's Restaurant, which was on Tower Avenue. And Marge and her friend got there, and it was very, very crowded. And she said they turned around to leave, and all of a sudden they saw this hand shoot up from the back of the restaurant and call them over. And it was Dick and his sister and his sister's boyfriend. And so they sat down with them and stayed, and then each went their own way. The next day she was studying for a test at the university in the student lounge, and Dick's sister came up to her and said, they had a little small talk before this, and she said, Dick was wondering if you'd like to go out tonight. And she said he would have asked you himself, but he's out of town, but he'll be back this evening. And would you like to go on a date with him? Go out to dinner at the Gitchinadji Club and then go bowling. And Marge is like, well, yeah.
Wow.
So she called her mom and, said, guess who's coming to our house tonight? And of course everyone knew Dick Bong by then, because by the time he came home in 1943, he had already shot down 20 planes, and he was considered an ace. Not yet the ace of aces, but he was an ace. So everyone knew him. And he and Marge went on the date, and that was the beginning of the romance. And he was home till the end of January. And
okay, so they had a couple months to get to know each other.
Get to know each other, yeah. Yeah, he said at first that he was going to date a lot of girls while he was home. Oh. But it was only Marge.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, then he went back for
He went
2
back.
Years. How often did he come back to see her?
Well, whenever he could, I guess. By the time he started, once he hit that 20 planes, and then the number kept growing and growing, he became valuable as a fundraiser also. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes they'd take him out of combat, and he'd come to the United States, and he'd do fundraising drives. And he was here once. Was it in June of 44, I believe? He got a new plane, and he came back to Superior.
Because he had to get Marge's picture on it,
right.
This
was the first plane that had Marge's picture on it was shot down, and he wasn't in it. Somebody was using his plane, and they shot it down. And what was different about Marge's picture was that it was an actual photograph of her, and it wasn't painted on there. It was a photograph that had been blown up and put on this plane. There was someone, the first time he had it done, I don't know if he knew someone who was in New Guinea, who was in the service, who actually did that. He had a very small graduation picture of Marge, and this guy blew it up, and then he tinted it and put many coats of lacquer over it. And people always think it's painted on, but it was an actual photograph of Marge. But then that plane got shot down, so he had to come. He flew his new one to Superior, and at the airport here in Superior, there, I don't remember if it was the JCs or the Junior Chamber of Commerce or I don't know which group it was, but they made sure that another picture of Marge got put on there.
In the same way, or did they paint this
No,
one?
no, I believe it was another, because it's an actual photograph. If you look at it, you know that probably someone didn't paint it, that it's her actual graduation photo.
Do you know if the plane at the Bong Center now has
that
same
I think it has Marge on it.
done?
What surprises me about the plane at the Bong Center is how small it is. And it's a plane just like Dick flew, and I just thought, how do you ever have the nerve, the courage? I don't know. The stupidity at some point. I don't know what it is, but how do you the courage, really, how do you ever think that you're going to go up in that and you're going to be okay? But he did. And when you listen to people talk about him, they say he wasn't that great of a shot, but he had an unbelievable eyesight. They said he could see things before other people saw them, and he was able to focus on them. And he was just made to be a fighter pilot, I guess. He just had the natural skills. Maybe it was all the deer hunting.
Could be.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they had quite a romance.
They did, and a lot of opportunities for Marge. That if Dick would come home and he had to go on a speaking engagement or something, like I know once she went to Chicago, and then when he came home for the final time before they got married, or when he was finally out of service, that month between when he came home and when they got married, it was like every day they were someplace. They went to Milwaukee to speak to, I don't remember which group it was, if it was the Elks or something like that. And the organization gave Marge a fur coat and an insurance policy to cover it in case anything happened to it. And they bought Dick a military overcoat, a new military overcoat. I mean, they were incredibly generous, and not only with items, but with donating money to war causes, because Dick was there, and sort of like everybody wanted to see him and maybe touch him. And I think my favorite saying about him, though, is one from Collier's magazine where they said, he left a country boy and he came back a country boy, but in between he became an American hero. And every time you hear someone talk about Dick Bong, they say he never changed. He was this decent, self-effacing young man who happened to do, have this spectacular military career.
And then he was able to, he came back home, he got married, but the story doesn't have a happy ending.
No, it doesn't have a happy ending. And when I know in preparation for this, I looked through all the newspapers and I read every story about them. And it just seemed like such a whirlwind romance and so many exciting things. And I thought, thank goodness they had that. Thank goodness wouldn't it have been awful if you had known what was ahead of you, that this was only going to last that very, very, very short time?
Because 6 months.
6 months, he was dead. This is the man who didn't want to get married while he was in combat because it was too dangerous. Who knew when you're testing planes that you're going to die? And I just think of his family, how horrible that must have been, especially for his mother. You get your beautiful, beautiful boy through a war, and then he's taken away from you. It's just too sad to contemplate, really and truly. But they had a wonderful time while they were together, which is great. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Did Marge ever remarry?
She did. She married 2 more times, I believe. And the last one lasted for quite a while, and she had children with him. But the thing about Marge is she came back when they were building the new Bong Center, not the one out in Poplar, although she was involved in that. But she came back and did quite a bit of fundraising for that.
Yes, I remember meeting her at that point.
Yeah.
She was quite a lady.
Yes,
also.
she was. Yes.
And there was one quote that you had found. What publication did this one come from?
I think it was. I believe.
Oh, it was from Superior. The quote is from Superior's Greatest Wedding Now History.
Right.
From the Evening Telegram's front page on February 12th, 1945. And
I think he actually said this to the cameras. To you men still overseas, I hope you can come home soon to as nice a feeling as I have here now. Every one of you deserves it, and I hope you'll receive it. That probably took a lot for Dick to say. He was one of those northern Wisconsin people who did not show their emotions too often, so that was probably very heartfelt from him.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, you've done a lot of research on this. Is there anything else that really sticks in your mind as something you'd like people to know about this whirlwind romance, about this wedding, or about this couple?
I don't know. I'm still fixated on that cake.
That's a big cake, my friend.
That is a big cake. I just thought it was just that sort of ray of sunshine in such an awful world. And I'm sure people thought that the war was almost over. Once we hit those beaches at Normandy on D-Day, the end was in sight, but it wasn't. And I think they must have just grabbed onto this and enjoyed it almost as much as Dick and Marge did, probably. You just never know where your heroes are going to come from, do you? No. Who knew they would come from a farm in Poplar, and from a boy who found his love of flying when he saw Calvin Coolidge's plane, his mail plane, fly over the Poplar farm. Mm-hmm. You just never know.
No, and he also had a beautiful singing voice, and he played clarinet.
Right. I watched this DVD called The Boy from Poplar, and the first time I watched it, I heard someone singing, and when I read the credits, I found out it was Dick Bong. And since then, I've wondered if he recorded that song for Marge. It was a song from the 1930s called It's a Sin to Tell a Lie. And in those days, you could record a record. You could go to a music store, and they would actually print a record, and you could send it to someone. And he had a marvelous singing voice, and he sang this a cappella. And I thought, I'd fall in love with a guy who sang that song to me. But yeah, I was very surprised. And he did play clarinet in the Central High School band. And on this DVD, his sisters were talking about, growing up on the farm. And one of them said that Dick would sometimes go on the roof and play his clarinet.
Oh, so if you were by Central School back then, you would hear some clarinet music coming down from above.
Oh, that was at the farm, though. He's saying
at the farm.
Okay. He would go up and on the house and play his clarinet for the family and the cows, I believe.
Awesome. Quite a young man.
Yes, and you know what he said about Marge? I guess when I really think about it, this was the thing that hit me the hardest. Was years later, Marge was, talking about their romance, and she said Dick told her that he fell in love with her because she was so silly and fun to be with, and he said, "You made me feel young." And he was 23 years old, and I thought, what did those years in the war do to you? That at 23 you felt old. But he said that's what she did for him. She made him feel young again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sharing that story, that love story.
And it's almost their anniversary.
It is, very soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on Archive Dive. New episodes come out monthly and can be found at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.